The first time Alara Quinn held a bow, she was 9 years old and barefoot. The last time, she was 22, crouched in the underbrush of the Coyote Ridge, with dirt on her cheek, blood on her sleeve, and the wind screaming through the trees like a warning. She pulled the string back slow, silent. Ahead, 5 riders. Men in long coats, rifles slung low, eyes sweeping the gulch below. They laughed like they owned the land, like they hadn't burned it down 3 years ago. Her heartbeat matched the tension in the string. And then, there he was, last in the line. The 6th. Alara's grip faltered. Her breath caught. Because the man riding that chestnut stallion, sun striking his profile like a ghost from another life, wasn't just another outlaw. It was Asher Dale, and she had once whispered his name like a prayer. 3 years earlier, she'd loved him. When he rode with her father, when they fenced the canyon together and dreamed of trading furs for books, bullets for cattle. He'd been different back then, quieter, thoughtful. And she'd believed he'd come back the night her father rode out with him to settle a deal with the McCrae brothers. But they never came home. Only the brothers did. And the ranch went up in flames 2 days later. Now Asher rode with them, laughing, unscarred, and very, very alive. Alara released her breath, not the arrow. She lowered the bow slowly, heart thudding like hooves in her chest. She watched them pass, hidden by pine and grief. Her legs shook. She should have fired. She'd promised herself she would. But instead, she sat back into the dirt and let the bow slip from her fingers, her pulse still tangled in the past. That night, in a hollowed-out hunting shelter, Alara rewrapped the cloth around her ribs and stared at the flames dancing in her fire pit. Asher Dale, alive and riding with murderers. It didn't make sense, unless he had betrayed her father, unless he had been part of it all along. She closed her eyes and whispered into the night air, "Next time I won't miss." And in her hand she sharpened an arrow with a bone knife, etching his name into the shaft. The next morning Alara followed their trail at a distance. Hoof prints and soft dust, broken sagebrush, a cigarette stub still warm. They weren't hiding their presence. Because men like the McCrae brothers didn't need to hide. They ruled with fear, but Alara didn't fear them, not anymore. Not since she'd buried her father on the ridge and taught herself to track, shoot, survive. Not since she stopped answering to anyone but the trees and the truth. She followed them southeast, toward Drywater Station, a lonely town on the edge of the desert, where gun smoke lingered longer than sermons. By dusk, she reached the outskirts, watching from the bluff. 6 horses, 1 saloon, no law. Inside, the tavern was a collage of danger. Cards slapping on wood, whiskey burning throats, and a piano missing 3 keys still playing a tune meant to drown memory. Alara slipped in wearing a threadbare shawl, eyes down, boots dusty. She moved like a shadow, ordered nothing, and kept to the far corner, watching. The 5 men she didn't care about sat at their usual table. Loud, slouching, sharp with laughter. And Asher? He sat at the bar, alone. Back straight, hat low, not laughing, not smiling, just drinking something dark and swirling a coin between his fingers. She studied his face. 3 years hadn't changed him much. Still broad-shouldered, still quiet in a room full of chaos. But something else was there too. Tiredness, like he was leaning against time and losing. Then one of the McCraes stood, slapped Asher's back hard. "You still got that half map, boy?" Asher barely moved. "I got it, like always. Then we ride at dawn." And with that, they staggered away. Alara's blood chilled. A map? Her father used to carry a hand-drawn land deed, scribbled in ink and sealed with a frontier marshal's signature. It led to Quinn's claim, a plot of untouched silver deposits, enough to buy a state if mined right. He'd only ever told 2 people, his daughter and Asher Dale. That night, Alara waited behind the stable as the town slept. And when Asher came out alone, saddlebags over his shoulder, she stepped from the dark. "Drop the bag," she said quietly, bow drawn, arrow aimed at his chest. He froze, didn't turn, didn't flinch, but his voice, steady and quiet, broke something in her anyway. "If you're going to shoot me, Alara, do it before I look at you." Her hands shook again. He turned, eyes the same storm gray she remembered. And when he saw her, real, not ghost or memory, his face changed. Not with fear, but with regret. "I thought you were dead." She gritted her teeth. So did I. The silence between them stretched, taut as the bowstring in Alara's grip. She didn't lower it. Not yet. Asher stood still in the moonlight, the silver edge of his knife visible on his belt. But he made no move for it. "You shouldn't have followed them," he said. "I followed the men who burned my home," Alara snapped, voice low. "The same men you ride with." "I don't ride with them," he said. "I ride near them. There's a difference." "Not from where I'm standing." Asher sighed and reached slowly into his coat. I'm going to pull something out. Just paper, not a weapon. Alara nodded once, curt. He pulled out a worn piece of parchment, folded 4 times, water-stained and brittle at the edges. Her father's handwriting. The map! Her breath caught. My father died because of that, she whispered. Asher shook his head. Your father died because he trusted the wrong man. And it wasn't me. Alara's grip tightened. You were the only one who came back alive. I was the only one who didn't go all the way in, Asher replied. I waited with the horses. I saw McCrae pull his gun first. By the time I ran in, your father was already down. And I would have died beside him if I hadn't run. You ran. I came back. He stepped closer, hands open. I carried that map because I didn't want them to find the other half. I've been buying time, trying to learn where they'd go, who they'd sell it to. Hell, his eyes met hers, worn, raw. I never betrayed him, Alara. Her hand still didn't drop the bow. You said you thought I was dead. He nodded. I went back that night. The ranch was already gone. Ashes. I searched the ridge for 2 days, I thought. He looked away. I thought maybe that was justice. For not saving him. Alara's arrow wavered. Her fingers ached from holding it back. Finally, she lowered the bow, but didn't unstring it. I want the truth, Asher, she said. All of it, every ugly inch. He nodded. Then ride with me. At dawn. We'll follow them. Together. You still trust me? She asked. He looked her dead in the eye. No, he said. But I remember you. And that's more dangerous than trust. That night, Alara didn't sleep. She watched the stars turn slowly over the prairie and whispered the names of every man she'd ever lost. At dawn, she saddled her horse, and beside her Asher mounted up, silent and grim. Enemies, allies? She didn't know, but the past was no longer behind her. It was riding right next to her. The desert stretched before them like a parchment scorched at the edges. Alara rode beside Asher in silence, the wind tugging at her braid, dust collecting on her boots. They had followed the McCrae gang's trail since dawn, faint hoofprints, crushed brush, bits of ash where they had left a fire still smoldering. But it wasn't just the trail they were chasing. It was the other half of the map, the one her father had sworn never to reveal. And Alara was starting to realize he hadn't, not even to her. You said they wanted the land, she murmured. Asher nodded without looking at her. Not just any land. That canyon your father called Deadwing's Drop. That place is cursed, she said. Which is why it's perfect to hide something, he replied. Alara clenched the reins. Like what? But Asher didn't answer. Not yet. By mid-afternoon, they reached a dried creek bed. The McCraes had camped here. 3 boot prints, a rusted tin left behind, and the smell of tobacco. But more than that, something scratched into the stone. A mark, a crude symbol, a crooked crescent with a dot. Alara's eyes widened. My father carved that same mark into the back of his saddle. Asher knelt beside it, brushing away grit. It's a signal. Your father wasn't hiding the map from the McCraes. He looked up at her. He was hiding it from you. The words hit her like a slap. She stepped back. That's not true. He knew if you ever got your hands on it, you'd follow him into this. Into what? Asher stood, eyes sharp. A war for something that was never meant to be found. That night, they camped beneath a ridge of old pine. Alara sat by the fire, staring into it. She remembered her father's hands, scarred, rough, gentle only when they braided her hair. She remembered how he stopped talking the day her mother died, and how he never let her ride to the canyon. What's in Deadwing's Drop? She asked quietly. Asher looked at the flames, then at her. Something sacred, something stolen. From the Comanche? He nodded. Her breath caught. And you knew? My mother was one of them. Alara's eyes burned. Everything was shifting. Asher's silence wasn't betrayal. It was protection. Her father's lies weren't to harm her, but to shield her. But the fire was already lit. The McCraes wanted what lay buried, and they would kill to unearth it. At dawn, Alara stood beside her saddle, staring at the horizon. We stop them, she said. We take back the map. And after that, she met his gaze. Then we decide if the truth deserves to stay buried. They reached the canyon by dusk. Deadwing's Drop. Alara had heard the name whispered like a ghost story among ranchers, carved into trail posts by trembling hands. No bird song echoed here. No breeze stirred the grass. Only stillness, thick and wrong, like the land itself remembered what had been done. The trail ended at a jagged cliff where firelight flickered below, the McCraes' camp. Alara crouched low beside Asher. They watched from a ridge, eyes scanning the figures below. 6 men, 3 horses, 1 large tent. Inside that tent was the other half of the map, and maybe the end of every question Alara had ever asked. We wait till they sleep, Asher whispered. Alara shook her head. No, we move now before they burn it or bury it. He grabbed her wrist. This isn't vengeance. If we go in half blind, it becomes a grave. She pulled free, eyes flashing. You've never been a Quinn. You don't know what they did. But Asher's voice was low, steady. I know enough to say this. Your father made an oath. And if they break into what's buried here, it's not just about you anymore. That night they crept from the ridge like shadows. Asher slipped through the perimeter while Alara approached from the riverbed. The wind carried the stench of tobacco and blood. She gripped the knife at her hip, remembering her father's hands teaching her how to gut fish, how to silence fear. The first guard dropped without a sound. The second never saw the arrow. And then they were inside. The tent was dim, lit by a single oil lamp. Maps, papers, bottles of whiskey. And at the center, a locked chest. Alara stepped toward it. Asher covered the flap. Hurry! She knelt. She knew this chest. Her father had kept it under the floorboards, sealed with 3 iron latches and a Comanche glyph carved on top. Her breath hitched. She reached into her coat and pulled out the key that had hung around her neck since childhood. It clicked. The chest creaked. Inside, the map, whole, complete, and something else. A letter, addressed in her father's hand. To Alara, when you're ready. She unfolded it, hands trembling. If you found this, it means the past has risen, and the blood we buried is demanding light. The map leads to a place no white man ever owned, and no Quinn ever should. I took it. I regretted it. Don't follow my path. Bury the map, and bury me with it. Alara's vision blurred. Asher read the words beside her, then stepped back. They'll come for it. I know. You still want to keep going? She folded the letter, eyes steel. No, I want to end it. Suddenly, gunfire cracked outside. The McCraes were awake. Alara grabbed the map. Asher raised his revolver, and the tent burst into chaos. The canvas tent erupted as bullets tore through the fabric, sending papers flying like panicked birds. Alara dove sideways, clutching the map to her chest, while Asher returned fire through a tear in the wall. The McCrae brothers had found them. You go first, he barked. But Alara shook her head and flung a lantern at the tent's entrance. Flames surged into the night with a roar, swallowing the map table in fire. Screams rose from outside, curses and gunshots cracking like thunder. We're not running anymore, she growled, sliding beside Asher. They moved together, fluid, wordless, cutting through the flames like wolves through snow. Outside, the canyon flickered with firelight and fury. The McCraes had regrouped fast, 4 of them, armed, angry, and looking for blood. Alara recognized the tallest one instantly. Wes McCrae, the man who had spit on her mother's grave. The man who had sworn her father was a thief. He stepped forward now, shotgun raised, voice like a sneer. Well, if it ain't the little Quinn girl and the coward who ran. Asher said nothing. Alara didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped in front of Asher, the firelight catching in her eyes. You stole my family's land, burned our home, lied about everything. Wes smiled. Your daddy made a deal. He broke it. He protected something sacred, she shouted. Something none of you had the right to touch. Wes lifted the gun and fired. But Alara was faster. The arrow flew before he squeezed the second trigger. Straight into his shoulder, he howled and dropped the weapon. The others charged. The fight was brutal. Asher tackled one to the ground, fists thudding in the dust. Alara disarmed another with a sweep of her bow, then used the handle to strike him down. Only Wes remained, staggering, bleeding, but still smiling through red-stained teeth. You're just like your daddy, he spat. Hiding behind Comanche ghosts. Alara walked up to him slowly, drawing her final arrow. I'm not hiding, she whispered. I'm burying the last lie. And with that, she snapped the arrow across her knee and tossed it at his feet. I'm done. Wes fell to his knees. Asher pulled her back as the first hints of dawn broke across the canyon. Later, they stood over the remains of the chest. The fire had taken most of it, but the letter survived. Alara reread it in silence. Bury the map and bury me with it. She folded it gently, kissed the edge, and dropped it into the ashes. Then she turned to Asher. We don't have to chase ghosts anymore. He nodded, his voice rough. What do we chase then? She looked east, at the rising sun, at the land beyond. A future. The canyon behind them smoldered in silence, ashes drifting like pale snow as Alara and Asher rode east, toward the place her father had once called the Red Vein. It wasn't on any map. Only her father's old Comanche stories spoke of it. A place where the land ran red, not from war, but from a mineral vein so rich it shimmered under moonlight. A sacred ground. A secret worth dying for. Asher rode a little behind, his silence heavy, his shoulders taut with something unsaid. Alara glanced over her shoulder. You've been quiet since we left. He didn't meet her eyes. Because I'm not sure what I am to you now. She slowed her horse until they rode side by side. You're the man who saved my life. That's not all I am. No, she agreed softly. You're also the man I nearly killed. Asher let out a breath that was part laugh, part sorrow. But you didn't, he said, and that matters more to me than anything. They didn't speak for a long while after that. By dusk, they reached the base of a weather-beaten ridge. The stone jutted up like teeth, red veins glistening faintly beneath loose shale. "This is it," Alara whispered, dismounting. Her fingers traced the rocks like a forgotten lullaby. They built a fire near the ridge, and that night she told Asher the rest. How her father had found the vein years ago, deep in the canyon walls. How he and a Comanche elder had made a vow to protect it, not mine it, not claim it, but guard it. Because to the Comanche it wasn't just stone. It was sacred blood of the earth. "McCrae wanted it," she said. "That's what the deal was. And when Papa said no, they made sure he didn't walk away." Asher's jaw tensed. "And me, I was the bait." She nodded, but gently. "They never meant to let you live either." He stared into the fire, grief crackling like dry wood. "But I did. And now you're here," she said. "And you have a choice." He looked up. "You can help me bury it, or help me protect it." At sunrise, they stood side by side, digging deep into the canyon floor. Alara laid her father's last relics, his journal, his hat, the burned scraps of the old map, into the earth. And then Asher added his own token, a silver spur, the last of the McCrae brand still worn on him. They covered the grave with stone, not wood, so no one would ever dig it again. They left the ridge with lighter hearts, not because vengeance was done, but because justice had roots now. And together, those roots would grow something new. The return to Dry Creek was nothing like Alara had imagined. No one cheered, no one stared, but the silence, that was the loudest thing. Eyes glanced from behind curtained windows. Doors creaked open, only to close the moment she and Asher passed by. Children paused mid-chore, sensing the tension their parents pretended wasn't there. To them, Alara Quinn had vanished 3 years ago when her ranch burned to cinders, and now she had returned. Beside the man once believed to be part of the betrayal. Asher stiffened in the saddle. "We can turn back." Alara looked forward, jaw set. "No, I'm not running from ghosts anymore." They tied their horses outside the old mercantile, once run by her father's friend, Mr. Karen. The bell above the door jingled softly as they entered, and the scent of gun oil, flour, and salt pork clung to the wood-planked walls. Karen looked up from the counter and froze. "Alara," he breathed, as if saying her name might summon a spirit. "It's me," she said quietly. His gaze shifted to Asher. The friendly light in his eyes darkened. "I see you brought the traitor with you." Asher didn't flinch. He'd expected this. But Alara stepped forward. "He saved my life. Twice. And he risked his neck to bury the truth. Something no one else in this town ever did." Karen blinked. "You saying he's innocent?" "I'm saying he was set up by the same men who killed my father." Karen's jaw worked, but he said nothing. By the time they left the store, word had already begun to spread. Alara Quinn's back, and she brought the blacksmith outlaw. They buried something out in the canyon. Rumors twisted faster than prairie wind. That evening, they returned to the small cabin on the edge of town. It had once belonged to Mrs. Delaney, a widow who'd passed the previous winter. Alara had tended her in her final days, the only soul who remembered her kindness when the rest of town forgot. She had left the cabin to Alara, tucked into her will with a note. "Some places are meant for rebirth. Start yours here." They made a fire, silent as dusk, gathered outside. "I'll leave in the morning," Asher said. Alara turned. "Why?" "I'll just be a shadow at your side here." She crossed the room slowly. "Then let them stare at both of us," she whispered. He looked at her and this time didn't look away. Outside, a crow cried once. The sky held its breath. And inside, 2 survivors sat beneath a roof not built by hate, but by memory, healing, and the slow, stubborn beginning of something they never expected. Hope! The morning sun over Dry Creek was gold and deceptive, bright, warm, gentle, masking the tension that still cracked beneath the surface like drought in riverbeds. Alara stepped out onto the cabin's small porch, her boots crunching frost-bitten grass. Behind her, Asher was boiling coffee on the wood stove, every movement quiet but deliberate, like a man who had learned to never startle the silence. They hadn't spoken much since last night, not because they didn't want to, but because something was building, and they could both feel it. A horse approached. She saw him before he called out. A man in worn cavalry pants, boots that had seen desert and blood, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. One arm hung stiff at his side, wrapped in dark leather, a wound never properly healed. "Alara Quinn," he called out. She stepped forward, hand brushing the small pistol at her hip. "Who's asking?" He dismounted with a grunt, then looked at her like a man who'd carried too many secrets and not enough absolution. "Name's Royce Maddock. I was there the night your ranch burned." Inside, steam curled from mugs. Royce didn't touch his. I rode with the McCrae brothers once, long enough to regret it. Alara sat still. Asher stood, arms folded. Royce continued. Your father made a deal with them. Nothing dirty, just land. Grazing rights. Your family needed it. McCrae's wanted a cut of the cattle profits in return. She nodded. She remembered her father riding out that night. Remembered how calm he was. They planned to double-cross him, Royce said. Kill him. Take the land anyway.
And Asher?
Alara asked, voice razor-thin. They planned to kill him too. Said he was getting too close to your family. Called him soft. He looked at Asher now.
You were already bleeding when I found you tied behind the shed.
Asher nodded once. I don't remember much after that. Royce's gaze returned to Alara. I tried to stop them. Got a bullet for it. He lifted his arm slightly. The leather covering crackled. I ran. Hid for months. Figured no one would believe me if I came back. Until I heard you were alive. The fire popped. Alara leaned forward. Why now? Royce blinked. Because I heard a rumor. He pulled a weather-stained letter from his coat. One of the McCraes didn't die in the raid last year. He's alive. And he's coming back. He unfolded the letter. A single name scrawled in slanted ink. Grady McCrae. Asher exhaled slowly. He was the worst of them. Royce nodded grimly. If he's coming back to finish what he started, you'll need more than just truth. You'll need people who believe you. People who'll stand with you. Alara looked out the window. The town had watched her father's house burn. Now she would see if they'd watch her rebuild or stand in her way. The next day, Alara stood on the edge of town square, the dust thick beneath her boots, and every eye watching like the world had tilted just to stare. She wore her father's coat, too big at the shoulders, too long in the sleeves, but it carried weight, memory, and warning. Across from her, on the steps of the saloon, stood the mayor, Preston Hale, and a dozen men who remembered the fire. Remembered staying silent. Remembered looking away. Alara's voice cut through the wind like a blade. Grady McCrae is alive. You let his name rot in the dirt because it was easier than justice. Someone murmured. A few looked down. One or two, the ones with guilty hands, looked away entirely. She continued firm, unshaking. He took my father. Tried to kill Asher. Burned what my family built for generations. And now he's coming back. And you'd rather pretend it's not true than stand beside me. Silence. Until one man stepped forward. It was old Gideon, the former town smith, now stooped with age and half-blind, but voice steady. Your father saved this town once, from a flood that near killed us all. I watched him do it. I watched you grow up honest. And I'm done watching in silence. He placed a hand over his chest. You'll have my forge if you need it. My land, too. Then another voice, then another, until murmurs became words and words became support. Not everyone stood with her, but more than enough did. That night, Alara returned to the cabin. Asher sat by the hearth, sharpening a knife. Royce cleaned a rifle. Neither looked up when she entered. She walked to the mantel, unhooked the long, curved bow that had belonged to her mother, the one she hadn't touched since that fire. And for the first time in years, she strung it. The draw felt familiar. The tension welcomed her like an old friend. The weight of vengeance and duty pressed gently into her palms. Asher stood, quietly walked over. He said nothing, only looked at the bow, then at her eyes. Are you ready? He finally asked. Her voice was soft, but there was iron underneath. I'm not hunting Grady McCrae. A pause. I'm calling him. And with that, the girl who had once run from smoke and ruin became the woman who would draw fire into her own hands. Not to be consumed by it, but to shape it. Alara stood on the ridge where the prairie opened like a scar. Behind her, the town had gone still. Lamps snuffed, doors locked, hearts wary. In her hand, she gripped the bow. But it wasn't just a weapon tonight. It was a signal. Across the canyon was an old wooden post, once used by the Pony Express, now long forgotten by maps and riders alike. But Grady McCrae would remember it. She was counting on that. She drew the string back slowly, listening to the hum of tension in the wood, feeling the wind brush past her cheek. Then she lit the tip of the arrow, a soaked bundle of pitch and cloth, and whispered, "Come see what you buried." With a thrum, the arrow soared into the darkness, a streak of flame arcing across the night sky, and landed clean, igniting the dry grass around the post. The fire burned like a beacon. She waited. Hours passed. The stars shifted. Royce sat behind her, sharpening his blade, and Asher leaned against the tree, arms crossed, face unreadable. Then a sound. Low hooves, dozens. They came from the north trail. No torches, no shouts. just the hush of men who thought they were ghosts in the dark. But Alara had spent the last 3 years learning to listen. She turned her head slightly. "They're here." Royce stood instantly. Asher nodded once, already moving. They didn't run. They didn't hide. Instead, Alara stepped forward into the firelight she'd made, letting it flicker across her face. She raised her bow, not to fire, but to show she was armed, awake, and unafraid. The shadows broke, and the first figure to emerge wasn't Grady. It was Griffin McCrae, the younger brother, the one who had always been the meaner of the two, scar across his lip, snake coiled on his holster. And behind him 20 armed men, all eyes on the woman with fire behind her. Griffin grinned, spitting into the dirt. "Well, I'll be, if it ain't little Alara Quinn back from the ashes." He rode forward slowly, stopping just a few paces from the flames. "That arrow yours?" Alara didn't flinch. "That grave you filled with my father's body, also yours?" The grin faltered. For a second the fire cracked. Then he said, "We came for Asher. He's supposed to be dead." From behind her, Asher stepped into the firelight. His voice was calm. "You came to finish what your brother started. But he ain't here, is he?" Griffin's eyes darkened. "No," Alara said quietly, "because he's running from me." The fire popped. The men shifted, and something in Griffin's posture turned unsure. Asher's hand dropped to his sidearm. Royce crouched near the shadows, waiting. "But Alara?" She stood tall and raised her voice. "Tell Grady I'm not hiding anymore, and next time I see him, I won't miss." Griffin didn't reply. He simply turned his horse and rode back into the night, flames at his back and doubt in his spine. The prairie was quiet again, but the fire Alara had lit in the canyon still glowed like an open wound on the earth. Back in Royce's small cabin near the base of the ridge, the three of them sat in silence. Alara removed her gloves, her fingers shaking only slightly now. Asher stared into the fireplace while Royce paced near the window like a caged animal. Then Alara spoke, voice low. "He wasn't there, Grady, but Griffin was, and he looked afraid." Royce grunted. "Means you got under their skin." But Asher didn't say anything. He finally rose, walked toward the corner of the cabin where his saddlebag had sat untouched for weeks. From its bottom, he pulled out something Alara hadn't seen before. A bundle of letters, tied neatly with twine, old weathered edges, her name in faded ink. "These were meant for you," Asher said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Your father gave them to me before it happened." Alara's heart dropped. "You had these all this time?" Asher nodded. "I couldn't give them to you, not back then. You would have run into the fire." She snatched the bundle, her fingers trembling as she untied it. The top envelope cracked as she unfolded it. Her father's handwriting, firm, sharp, the way he'd always written reports for the ranch, leapt off the page. "My Alara, if you're reading this, something has gone wrong. I had suspicions about the McCrae boys, especially Grady. Not about cattle, not even land, something darker. They came to me offering a cut of something they found buried near Widow's Bluff. I refused. Next thing I knew, I wasn't supposed to wake up. If I don't survive, don't go after them alone. Not yet. They're part of something bigger. Something tied to those symbols carved into the canyon wall. You'll know what I mean when you see them. And when you do, burn this letter. I love you. Stay wild." "Pa!" She lowered the page slowly. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew they were going to kill him." Royce looked confused. "What symbols?" Alara turned to Asher. "You've seen them, haven't you?" He didn't deny it. 3 circles, interlinked, like a brand but older. It's carved into the canyon wall behind the old stable. They called it the Mark of the Promise. Grady believed it meant treasure. I think it meant death." Royce swore under his breath. "I thought this was about revenge, about your pa's murder. But it's deeper." Alara folded the letters and held them tight to her chest. Then she said quietly, "They didn't just kill him. They buried something with him." The next morning, before the dew had even dried on the prairie grass, Alara was already packed. She stood outside the cabin, bow strapped across her back, saddle cinched tight on her mare. The letters were tucked inside her coat. Royce and Asher came out behind her. "You're going back to Widow's Bluff?" Asher asked. She nodded. "I have to see the symbols for myself. I have to know what he meant." Royce adjusted the rifle on his shoulder. "Then you ain't going alone." And Asher, the quiet one, the one who had once buried truth in silence, stepped forward and said, "Let's finish what they started." Widow's Bluff waited. So did the ghost of what was buried there. They rode at dawn, hooves muffled by the morning mist that clung to the trail like breath held in fear. Alara led the way, her heart a drumbeat of dread and need. Widow's Bluff rose ahead, sharp cliffs and shadowed caves cutting the horizon like the edge of a blade. "We used to camp here," Alara murmured, dismounting. "Pa and I. Never stayed the night, though. He said the wind talked too much. Asher ran his gloved hand across the canyon wall. He wasn't wrong. They followed a narrow trail along the cliff face past half-buried ruins of an old outpost. Vultures circled overhead, silent witnesses. Then Alara stopped. There, she pointed. 3 circles, interlinked, carved deep into the stone. Time had not dulled their precision. The mark looked fresh, almost watching. Royce crouched. Looks older than any ranch brand I've seen. It's not a brand, Alara said softly. It's a warning. She brushed dust from the base of the carving and uncovered a 4th shape, a crude figure of a woman with a bow. Asher tensed. You think they believed this was you? I think they believed someone like me would come. And I think someone did, long before me. They camped in silence that night beneath the bluff. Alara couldn't sleep. The wind hissed through the rocks like whispered names. She sat up, letters in hand, and reread her father's final words. Her eyes caught something she'd missed. Look for the hollow beneath the mark. She grabbed her knife and climbed barefoot to the symbol. With every dig of the blade, the stone cracked. Then, hollow. A soft click. The wall gave way to a crevice. Inside, a leather pouch wrapped in wax cloth, brittle with age. She opened it. Inside were bones, small, delicate, burned at the ends. And beneath them, a piece of cloth, embroidered in black thread. The ones who break the promise die slow. Asher! Royce! She shouted. They came running, rifles drawn, but paused when they saw her pale face. They weren't just after gold, she said. They were covering something up. A death. A ritual. Royce's face hardened. Your father didn't die because of land. No, Alara said. He died because he said no to this, to whatever they were doing out here. That night they buried the bones by moonlight, far from the bluff. Alara placed the pouch in the ground with care and whispered, Rest now. Your name may be lost, but not your truth. She rose, brushing dirt from her knees, and turned toward the firelight. Asher met her gaze. What now? Now? She said, drawing her bow again. We find Grady McCrae, and we ask him what he promised. The town of Red Hollow hadn't changed since Alara was a child. Still dust-stained and sun-scoured, the buildings leaned like tired men after a storm. But behind the stillness, something had shifted. People looked longer, talked quieter. Asher noticed it too. They know we're here. Royce rode ahead, scanning rooftops. Or they know she's here. They dismounted outside the sheriff's office, once run by a friend of her father's. Now the door bore a new name carved with a rough hand. McCrae. Alara didn't knock. The door slammed open against the wall as she strode in, bow in hand. Grady McCrae looked up from a bottle of rye, his face lined like old leather, eyes red, not from tears, but whiskey. You finally came, he muttered, setting the bottle down. I figured you would. Alara's voice was steady. You were there the night my father died. Yes. Asher stepped forward, fists clenched. You said it was an ambush. You lied. Grady didn't flinch. I did, and I'm still breathing because of it. Alara placed the burned cloth on the desk, letting it unfold slowly. The words faced him. The ones who break the promise die slow. He stared at it, and for the first time, fear crawled into his voice. You found them. Alara didn't speak. She let the silence wrap around him like a noose. Grady sighed. We were young, foolish. That land under Widow's Bluff, it wasn't just cursed, it was guarded. There was an oath, an old one, made generations ago with the Comanche clan. Royce narrowed his eyes. What kind of oath? That no man would dig there, no man would build mine or settle it. In exchange, the clan let us live, let us grow. Grady ran a hand over his face. But gold was found. And the other men, Dale's father included, they wanted it. Alara's voice cracked. And my father? He said no. He remembered the stories. He begged them not to touch it. They laughed, said no one believed in ghosts. Grady looked up at her. He tried to stop them, and he paid. Silence fell like a dropped hammer. Then Alara whispered, So did others. We found the bones. Grady's shoulders sank. I've had 30 years to regret. You think I sleep? I think you'll sleep better behind bars. They left the sheriff's office with Grady in cuffs. Asher turned to Alara. You okay? She nodded, but her eyes were far away. The truth cost him his life. I won't let it die with him. Royce tipped his hat. What now? Now, Alara said, mounting her horse. We ride to the bluff one last time. I want to see what he died protecting. And behind her the wind whispered again, less like a warning, and more like a memory finally set free. The sky above Widow's Bluff was a vast, aching blue, so wide it seemed to press down with the weight of memory. The bluff stood like a sentinel above the valley, rugged, untouched, sacred. Alara had only been there once as a child, holding her father's hand. Now she returned not as a daughter, but as a reckoner. Asher, Royce, and Alara approached slowly, their horses' hooves muffled by the soft ground. No birdsong, no wind, only silence and the crackling of something ancient and unseen. "You feel that?" Royce muttered, like the air's waiting for something. Alara dismounted first, eyes fixed on a half-buried wooden marker near a gnarled tree. Time and weather had worn down the words, but the carving remained. Carving. Trespass and bleed. They walked further, toward a rise in the bluff, where the soil looked disturbed, still faintly marked from decades past. That was where the mining had begun, and where the dying had followed. Suddenly, Alara stopped. A series of shallow stones, arranged in an oval. She stepped into the center and dropped to her knees. Her hand brushed away dirt, a glint of something. Of beads, bone, braided cord, not just a grave. A burial circle, Comanche by the pattern, and what lay beneath hadn't rested easy. "This wasn't just land," she whispered. "It was a burial ground." Royce's breath hitched. "They dug up their dead," Asher cursed softly. No wonder the oath demanded silence. They didn't want justice, they wanted peace. Then from behind them a sound. Footsteps, not loud but intentional. The three spun, weapons half drawn. A figure stepped forward from the trees. Gray Bear. Not wearing war paint, not armed, just watching. Alara stood slowly. "You came." Gray Bear nodded once. His voice was quiet but carried. "You walked on sacred soil, but you did not take, and you did not lie." He knelt at the edge of the circle and placed a small satchel beside the disturbed grave. "The spirits remember." Alara stepped back, hands open, respectful. "What was this place to you?" "Our fallen, our mothers, our children. We buried them here when the river ran red with war." Gray Bear's eyes flicked to the disturbed soil. "Your father tried to stop the breaking. He honored the old ways. He was brave. A beat. You are his fire." Alara's throat closed. She bowed deeply, hands over her chest. "I didn't come to claim anything, only to understand." Gray Bear stood. "Then listen." He raised one arm. Behind him, from the edge of the trees, a slow chant began to rise. Low, rhythmic, ancient. Shapes moved in the shadows. More Comanche. Elders, riders, children. "Tonight," Gray Bear said, "we bury the hate." That night, under a sky dusted with stars, Alara watched a funeral rite older than any she had ever known. They sang not just for the dead, but for the truth. For promises kept. For silence honored. And as the first rays of dawn crept over the bluff, she felt her father's voice, not in words, but in the wind. "You brought peace." The next morning came slow and golden, the light streaming across Red Hollow like a benediction. A hush had settled over the town, not the anxious silence of fear, but the reverent stillness of change. Word had spread about the bluff, about the circle, about the truth, and perhaps more importantly, about Alara. She sat alone in the sheriff's office, her hand resting on the old tin star she had refused to wear. Not since that day with the bow, not since her world turned upside down. But now, as light pooled on the floorboards, she ran her thumb over its edges and whispered to herself. "Not power, just promise." The door creaked open. Asher entered, a bundle under one arm. "I figured you'd be here," he said with a warm softness. He placed the bundle on the desk. Inside, folded carefully, was her father's old hat. And beside it, a new journal. The one Asher had been carving the spine for weeks. "Blank pages," he said. "Time to write your own law." Alara smiled faintly. "Think anyone's left to listen?" Asher took her hand, rough fingers closing around hers. "You didn't draw that bow to make a scene. You did it to end a story." He paused. "And start a better one." Later that day, as Red Hollow gathered at the chapel, not for a funeral but for a celebration, Alara stood at the steps beside Asher. Gray Bear and two Comanche elders were among the guests, standing freely, heads held high. No fear, no tension, just witnesses to a mending. Royce came forward with a small child tugging his hand. "She wanted to thank you," he said, eyes a little damp. "Says you stopped the dreams." The little girl nodded solemnly. The whispering stopped. Alara knelt. "You were brave to listen." Behind her, someone played an old fiddle. A couple laughed. A dog barked near the stables. Life had returned. And Asher? He built a small forge just behind the chapel. Not for war, but for tools, for horseshoes, for mending plows, and for rings. One evening, as the firelight glowed against the anvil, he handed Alara a small, delicate band of metal, etched with the image of a bowstring coiled into a heart. "You said your aim was justice," he said. "I think you hit something deeper." She took the ring, her heart too full to speak. Then she looked up, eyes fierce, soft, and bright. "Let's build something no one can break." Epilogue. Years later, Red Hollow would remember Alara not just as the girl who once drew a bow in fury, but as the woman who never let go of truth, who turned betrayal into a bond, who met warriors with compassion, who stood in silence and spoke with action. And when newcomers asked where peace came from in a land once divided, old Royce would smile and say, "It started the day a girl didn't shoot, and a man with fire in his hands decided to stay."